Night fell over Highbridge like a dark cloth, with only trembling oil lamps hanging along the lip of the black fog rift. The alarm bell suddenly rang, its sharp metallic cry cleaving the silent night. From the cliff edge, the black fog began to rise like a cursed tide. In a cramped stone room, Ash tightened the leather straps on his wrists and listened to the bell like a countdown to a familiar death. He pulled on his cloth and metal armor and latched his harness to a coil of dark rune-etched chain around his waist. The door burst open, letting in cold air that carried the tang of Titan flesh and the metallic taste of black fog. On the hanging square, villagers hurriedly dragged children indoors, slamming wooden doors shut before the fog could slither in. From the bottomless depths, a low, muffled roar rose up and shook the stone under everyone's feet. When Ash reached the platform's edge, he saw it, a colossal flesh pillar climbing, bright red muscle coiling around a glossy black bone core. Glowing veins ran along its body, twitching with a heartbeat like living spells. Ash's hunting squad lined up on the launch rail, rune chains hooked to their belts with the empty-eyed look of people who had done this far too many times. "Jump on my mark and don't stare down too long," Ash barked, hiding the tremor in his voice. The bell shifted to a frantic rhythm for close range, and the stone under the launch rail shook harder as the flesh pillar reached Highbridge's ledge level. "Jump!" Ash shouted, hurling himself off the edge as his body plunged into the swirling black fog. The black fog swept across his mask, leaving a freezing sensation like invisible fingers rummaging through his memories. Beneath the fog, the Titan's mass loomed and Ash fired his hook into its flesh. The sound of metal biting meat wet and loud. His whole body dangled over the flesh pillar, swinging between the abyss and the twitching surface of its flesh. Above, heavy ballista on the stone walls hammered giant bolts into the Titan's shoulders and neck. The Titan roared and shook its body, making a distant hunter lose his grip and drop into the fog. Ash saw only a brief silhouette swallowed by the fog, followed by a dry, distant thud from somewhere below. As the flesh pillar tilted, the fog swept upward and brushed across another hunter's face, barely touching before drifting on. That hunter survived, but when he was hauled back up, he stared at his crying son and only asked, "Who is this boy?" Amid the chaos, Ash planted another hook, severing glowing tendons one by one to slowly weaken the Titan. Titan blood sprayed like warm rain, tinting the fog into hazy ribbons of red. At last, under the weight of chains and massive bolts, the flesh pillar lurched and plunged straight into the chasm, dragging a vortex of black fog with it. Highbridge shuddered and then slowly fell quiet, leaving only an empty space where the Titan had been. On the butchering, square villagers waited with knives, saws, and wooden tubs ready to turn Titan corpse into food and materials. The smell of Titan blood mixed with smoke and sweat, forming a stench everyone hated but couldn't live without. In the stone temple at the village's edge, Lyra sat on a narrow wooden bed, her hand over her chest where a circular scar rose beneath the fabric. Every beat of the Titan heart in her chest rang like metal tapping inside her skull, echoing the roar now fading deep below. The high priest stood before her, white robes stained with dried Titan blood, holding an ancient device of polished bone and rune-carved stone. "Your heart shard beats faster each time a flesh pillar appears," he said, his voice caught between reverence and greed. Ash was summoned to the temple, the smell of Titan blood on him making the sacred air in the room feel heavier. When Ash's gaze met Lyra's, he saw in her eyes the weariness of someone who had lived many lives and remembered none of them. The high priest told Ash that from now on he would be not only a hunter, but also Lyra's watcher and guardian of her heart shard. Leaving the temple, Ash walked onto the balcony and looked down into the black fog rift where the mist still churned like a cursed sea of clouds. For a heartbeat, the fog suddenly parted, revealing at the chasm's bottom a ghostly city with towers of pale blue light. Ash blinked, and when he opened his eyes, the city was gone, the black fog rolling back in as if nothing had ever been there. He wondered whether it was a fog-borne hallucination or someone else's memory trying to find its way back through his eyes. And in Lyra's chest, somewhere behind him, the Titan heart quietly changed its rhythm, as if answering a call from depths neither of them yet understood. Ash-gray dawn seeped through the small window as Lyra jolted awake, her chest aching as if someone were crushing her heart from the inside. Beneath her rough nightshirt, the circular scar on her chest burned hot, with black veins rising like a web of charred threads. Each heartbeat sent dizziness through her, the sound in her skull ringing like hammers striking a hollow Titan frame. She lifted her shirt and saw the dark veins spreading from the scar, curling across her pale skin like distorted runes. As she set her feet on the cold stone floor, Lyra noticed a small dried smear of blood as if her heart had tried to escape during the night. The wooden door shuddered open and a young acolyte peeked in, his face pale from lack of sleep and last night's Titan bells. "The High Priest wants you in the inner chamber at once," he said, his voice hoarse from shouting evacuation orders all night. Lyra pulled on her gray cloak and drew the hood up to hide the still-burning black veins on her skin. The temple corridor was narrow and long, its support columns carved from Titan bones still faintly scored with old butcher marks. Light from wall braziers stained the bone, pillars a sickly yellow, making the hallway resemble the innards of a giant creature not yet gone cold. Passing a narrow opening that overlooked the rift, Lyra glimpsed the black fog sitting lower than usual, as if inhaling before a storm. Her vision blurred for a heartbeat, and Highbridge and the foggy abyss overlapped like two misaligned paintings. At the top of the spiral stairs, Ash waited, his armor still stained with Titan blood from last night's hunt. In his shadowed eyes lay pressed down exhaustion and a flicker of alarm as he noticed Lyra's unsteady gait. "You all right?" Ash asked softly, holding out his hand as if afraid she might shatter at a touch. Lyra let him guide her down the steps, feeling the warmth of his palm in stark contrast to the irrational burning of the Titan heart in her chest. The inner chamber opened like the mouth of a cave, its vaulted ceiling held by curved Titan bones, with a rune-carved stone table glowing faintly at the center. The High Priest stood beside the stone table, back slightly hunched, holding an ancient device of polished bone and stone discs etched with strange spirals. "Lie down, child," he said in a voice smooth as cold ash, pointing to the hollow carved into the stone table. Lyra lay on her back, the stone cold against her spine, feeling as if she had stretched herself across another creature's ribcage. The High Priest set the bone device onto Lyra's chest directly over the circular scar, and the spirals on its stone discs flared to life. Each beat of the Titan heart made the device's needle jerk sharply, spinning in perfect sync with a faint roar echoing up from the rift. Ash stood by the table, his hand unconsciously gripping his hunting knife, his eyes never leaving Lyra's face as it grew paler. One heartbeat went violently out of rhythm, painful enough that Lyra's mouth opened in a silent cry and the world around her snapped off as if someone had blown out a lamp. When she opened her eyes again, she stood in the middle of a polished stone street beneath a deep blue sky that did not belong to Highbridge. Glass towers rose high, emitting their own pale blue light and casting shimmering reflections on the street like streaks of water. In the distance, colossal Titan bodies stood chained upright like pillars holding up the sky, with bridge-thick links driven deep into their flesh. At the city's center, a massive rune circle ringed a round black pit like a celestial eye, each symbol lighting and dimming like pulsing nerves. Cloaked citizens hurried back and forth, clutching books, glass canisters, and glowing stones, their faces tight with panic. Black fog seeped up from the pit, crawling along the steps and slipping between stones like a conscious liquid. Lyra tried to touch the shoulder of a passing figure, but her hand slid through them as through thin smoke. When she looked over the pit's edge, she saw the black fog rift again. But this time Highbridge was gone and another sky hung on the opposite side. From far below, an enormous heartbeat sounded, making the street beneath her tremble, and she realized it matched the rhythm in her own chest exactly. A thick wave of fog surged up from the pit, coiling around her legs and yanking downward as if 1,000 unseen hands were trying to drag her off the ledge. Lyra toppled into the dark, and the blue-lit city shattered into shards of glass that flew past her. She lurched upright on the stone table with the bone device on her chest rattling violently before going dead and returning the room to cold gray. Ash was gripping the table's edge, his face gone ashen and his throat dry as he called her name. The high priest did not look at her, but stared at the device instead, scribbling frantic symbols onto a nearby stone tablet. I saw a city, Lyra said, her voice ragged, at the bottom of the rift, and it wasn't a hallucination. The high priest gestured for Ash to lead her into the side room where a wooden table, ink and paper already waited as if he had known. Sitting before the blank sheet, Lyra let the ink fall like blood, then began to sketch the glass towers and rune circle that still clung to her memory. Ash stood behind her, watching the lines appear, and a chill ran down his spine as he recognized the familiar shapes of the towers. He pointed to the tallest tower where Lyra had drawn pale blue light flaring like flame and murmured that he had glimpsed it in the fog when he looked into the rift last night. They fell silent, leaving only the sound of her heart pounding and Titan blood rain falling somewhere on the stone roofs outside. Hours later in the village hall, elders hunched over a carved wooden map of the cliff, shifting red stones that marked the disturbingly frequent Titan sightings. Ash stood back in a corner, listening to them talk about dwindling stores and the need for more hunts, even though every venture outside meant gambling with their memories. Outside, villagers formed a long line at the meat stall, each holding an old bowl, their eyes fixed on the dripping Titan slabs on the table. By late afternoon, Ash and Lyra stood once more on the wide balcony overlooking the black fog rift where distant columns of mist were swelling like signs of new Titans rising. "I can't remember my parents' faces," Lyra said, eyes on the shifting fog, "only that someone once held my hand at the cliff's edge." Ash swallowed and said that what he feared most was not the Titans, but the day he might look at his sister and no longer remember her name. They stood very close, close enough that Lyra could hear the whisper of the chain at Ash's belt touching his armor with each breath. Wind from the rift blew her hood back, revealing hair stuck to her forehead and a faint vein tracing up her neck. Ash lifted his hand, hesitated, then gently brushed a stray lock from Lyra's cheek, his cool fingertips touching her hot skin. The world narrowed to their breathing and the blurred outline of their mouths slowly drifting closer together. Suddenly, from the bottomless depths, a roar deeper than any they had ever heard rose up, making the balcony tremble and the air thicken. Pain slammed into her like a blade of fire, and Lyra doubled over, clutching her chest as the Titan heart inside her flared through the cloth. Ash caught her in his arms, feeling searing heat through her cloak as if he were holding a beating coal. The black veins on Lyra's neck and collarbones lit with a dim red glow, like a map of fractures running through the world. Below, the black fog swelled with that same rhythm, each pulse briefly revealing shadowy towers and rune circles before swallowing them again. "It's calling me," Lyra whispered, her lips pale. "From down there, it wants me to come." Ash held her tighter, feeling the frantic heart beneath the cloth, and for the first time he saw clearly that their path to survival might lie at the bottom of the rift instead of on this cliff. That night, when most of Highbridge's lights were out, and only a few red embers glowed on the balconies, Ash leaned against his wall, eyes wide open. Images of the blue-lit city at the bottom of the rift replayed in his mind like a fever that refused to break. Ash left his room and stepped into the dark hallway, letting his feet carry him toward the temple as if he were simply walking deeper into a dream. In the temple courtyard, the braziers had burned down to embers, their weak orange light casting drowsy ghosts across the Titan bone pillars. Ash tapped lightly on the door leading down to the archives, and Lyra opened it from within, her eyes still bruised with the weight of the afternoon's pain. "I couldn't sleep," she said quietly, her voice sanded down. "So I borrowed the key." They locked the door behind them and descended together down the spiral stone steps that led deep into the cliff's heart. The air below was thick with dust, old ink, and the faint tang of damp Titan bone.
A fleeting image.
The archive chamber opened like a cave of memories, with stone shelves packed with etched bone tablets, scrolls, and books bound in Titan hide. Lyra set the candle on a stone pedestal, its trembling flame making the ancient characters on a nearby bone tablet dance. "He never lets me read down here," Lyra said, brushing a tablet's edge. "But in the vision, I saw things like these." Ash pulled out a larger bone slab etched with a rune ring encircling a dark chasm eerily similar to the pit at the city's center she had drawn. Beneath the image ran ancient text glossed in a younger hand. "Year of the Rending, the escape from Titan chains." Another slab showed robed figures standing at a cliff's edge, arms raised, with the sky above them cracking into 1,000 jagged lines. "They weren't running from Titans," Lyra whispered. "They tore the sky open to drag another sky here." On a lower shelf, Ash found a scroll detailing a ritual. A person lying on a stone slab, chest opened, a Titan heart fitted into the rib cage like a locking stone. Next to the drawing was a mark like Lyra's scar with the words, "Living keys keep the wound within our grasp." Lyra stepped back half a pace, as if the drawing had just pointed straight at her from across centuries. "They did this to me?" she asked, her voice peeled raw from her throat. Ash felt his own throat go dry because deep down he knew the answer was yes, and the name of the one who ordered it was likely sleeping in the temple above. In a corner they found another bone record scrawled in hurried script. First attempt. Titan heart refused to sink, host shattered. Second, host went mad, leaped into the rift. The last line read, third attempt. Female juvenile. Heart reacts favorably. Majority of memories erased. Risk of phase deviation unknown. Female juvenile, Lyra repeated, staring into the air between shelves as if trying to slot broken memory shards back into place. Before Ash could say anything, a small sound came from the stairs like familiar heels stepping on dry bone. Lyra pinched out the candle, but it was too late. Light from another torch spilled into the chamber, carrying the long shadow of a white robe. The high priest stopped at the threshold, his eyes not on the tablets but on Lyra's hand, still resting on the ritual scroll. "I locked this place," he said, his voice not loud but filling the room. "And yet you both still found your way in." Lyra tried to speak an apology, but the high priest raised a hand to silence her, his shadow spilling over them like ink. "These things are not for a mind already torn," he said, his gaze cutting over her chest scar like a blade. He turned to Ash and, in a voice as calm as discussing the weather, said that from now on, Lyra would be kept in the temple cells until the heart shard stabilized or stopped. Ash stepped forward half a pace, but the high priest's look stopped him as if he had slammed into an invisible wall.
Lyra.
You will remain a hunter, the high priest said. But if she becomes a danger, the responsibility to end it falls to you. Lyra was led away first, her hands bound with a rune-stitched cloth that looked more like a ritual than a punishment. When the iron door of the temple cells shut behind her, the sound rang like a temporary full stop to what little freedom she had.
We must face.
Rumors spread through the village almost as fast as Titan blood smell, some calling Lyra a key, others whispering she was a living curse. Children were told not to look down into the rift and absolutely never to imitate the Titan heart girl standing on the edge to listen for the call below.
I cannot.
The next day, the sky was duller than usual, and the fog below rose in strange swirling columns as if something was thrashing beneath the veil. From a lower ledge, Ash saw a new flesh pillar climbing, but its body was not just flesh. Chunks of stone and broken columns jutted from its red muscle. In the Titan's back, Ash recognized rune-carved wall sections and a curved doorway exactly like the gates in the blue city Lyra had drawn. This flesh pillar looked as if it had dragged a piece of the vanished city up with it, kneading stone and meat into a nightmare of both worlds. The alarm bell clanged frantically, but this time it was joined by screams mixing fear and superstition. The city is climbing with them. In the hall, elders and the high priest stood around the wooden map, adding a large black stone streaked with white chalk to mark the city-bearing Titan on Highbridge's edge. They are no longer just prey, one elder said. They are the burdens of those who tore the sky before us. The high priest declared that they must mount a hunt larger than any before, or Highbridge would be crushed between Titan flesh and city stone. Ash was ordered to lead a vanguard squad, though his mind was filled only with pale glass walls and massive rune circles from Lyra's vision. But before the hunt began, as the sky turned the bruised purple of dusk, Ash slipped through rarely used stairways toward the temple cells. He found a small door veiled in cobwebs leading to an old tunnel looping around the temple's base. Once used to move the sick and the dead unseen, the tunnel was low and damp, its walls furred with moss, with Titan bones occasionally jutting through the stone like enormous ribs. At last he reached an iron grate looking into a small cell where Lyra sat on a stone bench.
You understand me, don't you?
Head against the wall, eyes open but seeing nothing. Lyra, Ash called softly, his voice partially swallowed by stone and iron. She turned her head, and for a heartbeat after seeing him, the red lines beneath her skin seemed to soften. They will use you to kill me if things get out of hand, she said calmly, as if stating a weather detail. Ash didn't ask how she knew, because he remembered the living key records and understood that the Titan heart in her heard more than human ears ever could. Earlier I saw it again, Lyra said, dropping her voice as if afraid the walls would repeat her. That city, and you. She told him that in her latest vision she stood at the bottom of the rift among broken towers, and Ash, soaked in Titan blood, was dragging her away from a circular gate that was closing. You were there, she said, staring straight into his eyes through the bars. And I think maybe it wasn't the future, but something circling back from another fall. Ash felt the ground tilt slightly under him at the thought that he might already have died at the bottom of the rift and yet still be standing here. Whether it's the future or someone else's memory, Lyra whispered, I think our path isn't just clinging to this cliff anymore. Somewhere far below, another roar rumbled up, softer but dragging a synchronized vibration through Lyra's scar and Ash's shins. Ash answered with a promise quieter than the wind that he would not use his knife on her unless she herself forced his hand. Lyra closed her eyes for a moment, as if that promise had etched a new line onto the invisible map of fractures within the world. As Ash left the tunnel, his shadow merged with Highbridge's night, carrying not just fear of titans, but the faint echo of a city at the bottom of the rift waiting. The next morning, the temple bells rang more slowly than usual, as if all of Highbridge were holding its breath before what was about to be decided. In the inner sanctum, Lyra stood in the circle of a brazier's light, her hands still bound with rune cloth, surrounded by elders and the high priest whose eyes were like blades. The high priest declared before them all that Lyra would be temporarily released to join the coming hunt, as a sign the temple was not turning its back on Highbridge. He spoke solemnly, saying the titan heart in her chest might guide them against the new mutated flesh pillar bearing city stone. Outside, when people heard, some rejoiced at a hint of hope while others clutched bone charms, muttering that using a curse as a compass was suicide. Ash leaned against a bone pillar at the room's edge, feeling every word the high priest spoke wrap another invisible chain around Lyra's throat. When the gathering ended, the high priest signaled for Ash to stay with a slight nod that made everyone else ebb away like a receding tide. The heavy doors closed and the lock turned with a soft click, turning the wide chamber into a well containing only 2 men and the sound of Ash's heartbeat. The high priest stepped down from the stone dais, coming closer, and in the brazier's light his eyes lost their sanctity, leaving only cold calculation. "Do you trust me, Ash?" he asked, like a kindly grandfather asking his grandchild about the weather. Ash didn't answer, so the high priest went on, lowering his voice. "Your sister, she is well, yes?" For a moment, Ash saw his sister's face, messy braids, once bright eyes, now always watching for creeping fog near their home. "I can guarantee rations for your family. Ensure the children won't go to the quarries or hunts too early," the high priest said, as if offering a small favor. He paused, then added, each word falling heavier than wet coal. "In return, if during this hunt things go beyond our control, you will end that experiment and bring its heart back to me." The word "it" instead of "her" made Ash feel as though someone had erased Lyra from humanity with a single syllable. Ash nodded because not nodding wasn't a choice. And that nod dropped between them like a stone tossed into the abyss, vanishing, but leaving echoes. As Ash turned away, he knew it was his first lie to Lyra. A lie not spoken but made of since that afternoon, the training yard turned into a staging ground. Rune chains were checked, steel hooks sharpened, hastily patched armor plates riveted tight. Lyra's wrist bindings were removed and replaced with a rune collar linked by a thin chain to Ash's belt, a protection disguised as a tether. A few hunters' gazes slid to the chain with unease, as if looking at a double-edged blade they weren't sure whether to thank or avoid. At the cliff's edge, temporary launch platforms of wood and iron were bolted into the rock, linked by frayed ropes and salvaged bridge pieces from the last Titan's corpse. On the lower ledges, the city-bearing flesh pillar was nearly upon them, chunks of wall and broken columns on its back, scraping the cliff and falling in slabs like stone rain. The fog was so thick that platforms only a few steps apart were mere smudges, and every voice sounded stuffed with cotton until only heartbeats and chains remained. "When I give the signal, we jump together," Ash said close to Lyra's ear, his breath stirring the strands of hair at her neck. Lyra closed her eyes for a beat, letting the Titan heart's rhythm sink her into a hazy state where past and future blended into a long, pulling fog. For an instant, she saw Ash falling, herself standing on a drifting wall fragment, a chain snapping, and heard the high priest whisper, "End it." She opened her eyes just as the flesh pillar rose to their level, its mix of flesh and stone forming a colossal wall blocking their view. "Jump!" Ash shouted, and they hurled themselves from the platform like two tiny arrows aimed at the monstrous body. The fog slapped Lyra's face, but this time she felt it not only rummaging through memories, but searching along the invisible thread that tied her to the rift's bottom. Ash's hook sank into the Titan's flesh, while Lyra buried hers into a rune-carved wall stuck to its back, feeling as if she'd snagged the carcass of a house. They swung on the flesh pillar's side, the abyss yawning beneath them like a god's open mouth, and a thin, gray skin of clouds stretched weakly overhead. Other hunters appeared in the fog like ghosts, firing hooks and hacking at glowing tendons to weaken the Titan's arms and legs. Lyra sensed the movement before her eyes caught it. A twist, a jerk, a shudder that threatened to fling them all from its side. "Hold tight!" she cried, and a heartbeat later the flesh pillar bucked, flinging an overhead scaffold away and tossing 3 hunters into the black fog. Ash tried climbing onto a jutting stone ledge to reach a tendon, but the wall beneath his boot cracked and poured rubble like a waterfall. That slip was enough to tear his body free of its anchor. The chain snapped loose and Ash dropped into the black fog like a stone from the cliff. In Lyra's head, all other sounds vanished, leaving only the Titan heart pounding and deep murmurs like some ancient language whispering around her bones. She didn't think. She unhooked herself, cut her own safety line, and dove after Ash, leaving the horrified shouts of the other hunters clinging to the Titan's side. The fog caught her like icy water, stinging so hard her first thought was, "This is what it feels like when memories crack." Beneath the fog, she dimly saw Ash's shape falling, trailing a silver streak from his broken chain like a line drawn in the air. The Titan heart in her chest flared not just like a lamp, but like a small spinning gate, pulling fog and light into itself and flinging them out in another direction. Lyra hurled her thoughts toward Ash, clinging to his image like a hook, and whispered inside, "This is the mark." The world bent in a single heartbeat. Instead of dropping straight, Ash was yanked sideways as if a giant hand had grabbed him and hurled him to another ledge. Lyra was dragged with him, her body snapping into existence on that narrow ledge with a jolt, knees scraping rock until they bled and her breath knocked away. Behind them, the flesh pillar still thrashed against the remaining hunters, while in front of them the bottomless abyss silently watched their jump through space. "What did you do?" Ash gasped, his eyes not yet willing to accept the distance his body had just folded. Lyra could only shake her head, because speaking would mean admitting she had dragged them off the world's normal falling path. Above, command screams rang out and the heavy ballistae fired their last volley, bolts driving deep into the city Titan's neck and joints.
Release the shadow.
The flesh pillar shook violently one last time, then under the weight of its wounds and chains tore free from the cliff and fell, dragging stone, fog, and its fading roar down with it. The ledge beneath Ash and Lyra's feet rattled like teeth in an old jaw, but held, leaving them suspended between a trembling high bridge and a chasm that had just swallowed another beast. When they were hauled up by ropes to another scaffold, hunters' cheers, cries for the fallen, and prayers blended into a thick wave of sound. Lyra stood amid it all, her legs shaking. But what terrified her most was a slick, cold gap in her mind, like a piece broken off from a painting. She suddenly remembered that she had once gripped a single name like an anchor for all fog-stolen things. But now that anchor had slipped. "The name, what was it?" she whispered, trying to assemble syllables but finding only emptiness like the chasm beneath the village. Ash, being hastily bandaged, heard her question and saw panic chewing at her already tired eyes. He stepped close, laid a hand on her shoulder, and said they had survived, that the Titan had fallen, that there were new things to fill the empty space. "But it was the only name I remembered," Lyra replied hoarsely. "Now, I don't even know who I've lost." Hunters around them started to drift away, carrying wounds and trophies back to the village, leaving Ash and Lyra on a swaying corner of the platform like two survivors lost in the echo of death. Ash raised his hand to touch Lyra's cheek, this time without the hesitation from the balcony because a fear greater than rejection was growing inside him.
This is just the beginning.
He saw the faint veins still under her skin, saw in her eyes a long hallway of memory doors slamming shut one by one, and knew his turn would come sooner or later. He leaned down, his mouth touching hers, at first as softly as testing whether the world would crack any further. The kiss deepened, not the saving kind, but the kind shared by two people who know they are borrowing time from something that never accepts payments. Ash kissed Lyra to steady the trembling in her eyes, but also to hide the tremor in himself, where images of a knife, a titan heart, and the high priest's command tangled together like a curse. When they pulled apart, their breath mingled in the thin mist, and for a moment Ash wished the fog would steal the memory of that order and leave this kiss behind. Beneath their feet, the black fog rift continued to swallow titans and memories, waiting for the day it would swallow the promise and silent lie Ash had just fed into it. A few days after the hunt for the city-bearing flesh pillar, the sky over Highbridge felt coated in gray glass, with weak light sliding over stone without warming anyone. Below the cliff, the black fog no longer simply rose and fell like a tide, but gathered into long looping bands like ranks of soldiers moving in secret. Each time a flesh pillar appeared, two or three smaller ones followed close behind, forming scattered clusters with a strange sense of order. In the council hall, the wooden map was now crowded with red and black stones, jammed so tightly there was no empty space left around the cliff's edge. Ash leaned against the wall, listening to elders argue whether it was coincidence or formation marching of things being directed by someone. The high priest studied the map in silence for a long time, then softly said that if the black fog rift was a wound, perhaps it was beginning to fester. News of the strange Titan formation spread through the village, swelling evening prayer gatherings while laughter in the hanging tavern thinned noticeably. That night, Lyra dreamed again, but the dream did not start in the glass streets as before. It began in a round chamber full of bone machinery. On the ceiling, curved Titan bones meshed like enormous gears moving slowly around a central black gap. At the chamber's center stood a machine as tall as Highbridge's bell tower, built from bone, metal, and rune-carved stone, looking like a skinned heart exposed for the world to see. Lyra recognized the rune rings running around the machine as identical to the ones at the vanished city's pit, only smaller and more intricate, like the inside of a wound. Cloaked city dwellers stood in a ring around the machine, their faces hollow from sleeplessness and fear of something beyond the sky. Lyra saw them bring children, books, and glowing stone orbs to the machine's edge, then push them into the black gap as if throwing the world's memories down a well. An elderly woman whose eyes looked eerily like Lyra's said they would tear this world apart to escape the titans besieging the sky. "We'll leave a wound," she said, "a door not fully closed in case the next world rots just like this one." Lyra looked into the machine's core and saw pieces of Titan heart spinning slowly, like fragments of monsters forced to be keys forever. At that hollow center was a round socket still empty, exactly the size of the heart shard currently beating in her chest. A distant roar tore through her vision, shredding the city, the machine, and those faces into swirling black mist. Lyra jerked upright on her cell bed, cold sweat gluing her shift to her skin, the Titan heart in her chest pounding as if it wanted to burst through her ribs. The lanterns in the corridor suddenly flared, and footsteps and armor clinks sounded like a procession being summoned to witness a sentence. The iron door swung open, two temple guards entering with forced calm on their faces, followed by the high priest and several acolytes carrying a rune-carved wooden box. "It is time," the high priest said, as if announcing prayer hour, "to close the wound our ancestors left hanging half shut." The box opened to reveal a long sacrificial knife, its thin blade etched with symbols, looking both like a bone saw and a metal key to an invisible door. Lyra did not ask what they meant to do, because the woman in her dream still echoed in her bones, speaking of leaving a wound and locking the door with one's own heart. "If we succeed, the wound will close," the high priest said. "The fog will recede, titans will cease climbing, and Highbridge will no longer live on the brink." He did not mention that when the wound closed, the villages hanging around it might fall with it, like excess flesh scraped aside by a surgical knife. On an upper level, Ash was walking a corridor when he caught snatches of the high priest whispering to an acolyte through a side door about the final sacrifice. He heard clearly the words "heart," "cast into the rift," "end the flesh pillar cycle," and finally, "the knife will be in Ash's hand, as agreed." Ash's inner world tilted for a moment as he realized he had not just been chosen as a hunter, but as the executioner of what the priest called that experiment. Without waiting to hear more, he turned and ran down the stairs, his own heart pounding no less wildly than the titan heart in Lyra's chest. In the inner sanctum, Lyra was laid on another stone slab, this time not for measurements, but for a rite, surrounded by candles, bowls of titan blood, and white cloth strips waiting to turn red. Above, the titan bone ceiling trembled slightly whenever a distant, flesh pillar roar echoed up, as if reminding them that their time was being measured by monsters. The high priest raised the sacrificial knife and began reciting ancient words Lyra did not understand, but the titan heart in her chest did, and it beat in a different angry rhythm. Just as the blade dipped lower, the entire temple shook from a massive impact. Outside, another flesh pillar had slammed into the stone tier beneath Highbridge, making bridges and homes shudder. A wall column split and crashed into the butchering square below, dragging screams, splintering wood, and alarm bells into a fractured rhythm. The tremor made the knife slip, merely scraping Lyra's skin and leaving a thin line of blood and a smeared rune burn. Ash burst into the inner chamber through a side door, ignoring all ritual, his armor dusted with falling debris and his eyes full of fire and fear. "Stop!" he shouted, his voice colliding with the titan roar rising from the rift like two waves crashing. The high priest turned, his face not angry but sad, like a butcher watching someone interfere with necessary work. "If we do not do this," he said, "the flesh pillars will not stop. One day there will be nothing left to eat, nothing left to climb." Ash did not argue with words. He drew his hunting knife, its plain blade unrunes but scarred, and stepped between Lyra and the high priest. The temple guards reacted a beat slow from the quake, then surged toward Ash, spears raised in a maze of arms, weapons, and tangled prayers. Ash killed no one, but he hacked at spear shafts, kicked knees, and used every hunter's trick meant for titans to topple men instead of beasts.
Stay focused.
In that chaotic gap, he turned and sliced through Lyra's bindings, then yanked her off the slab as if pulling someone from a pit's edge. "Run!" he said, and that was the decision that turned him from Highbridge's hunter into a rebel in their eyes. They sprinted into the corridor, the stone floor still trembling with each blow of the titan against the outer ledges. Through narrow openings, Ash saw wooden bridges bent, hanging houses snapped, and people and objects drifting through the air before vanishing into the fog. They took the temple's back stairs, a path few remembered, leading to a stone balcony sitting lower, closer to the black fog rift than to the village. On the balcony, the wind from the rift was so strong words were shredded into scraps, yet Lyra still clearly heard the titan heartbeat and the machine's whisper from below. Beneath them, the black fog was thinner today, with gaps revealing broken tower corners, huge rune circles, and specks of blue light like lamps buried underwater. "We have two choices," Ash said, leaning close to Lyra's ear so the wind wouldn't eat his voice. "Stay and wait for them to kill you, or go down there before they can."
I come for you.
Lyra looked down, then up, then at Ash, and for the first time realized her fear of losing memories had grown, larger than her fear of dying.
Choice is yours to make.
At least down there, she might touch the source of those memories. "If we go down," she said, "everything above might collapse, might change. But if we don't,
We have
everything
one
will
chance
keep
to do
rotting
this.
piece by piece." Behind them came hurried footsteps and the clink of weapons. Then Jace, a young hunter, and Mira, a scar-eyed sharpshooter, arrived, both faces dust-smeared and eyes seasoned by too many close calls. "If you jump, we jump," Mira said dryly. "Staying to hack at things from the same source without ever seeing its face is a waste." Jace gave a strained laugh and added that if there was anything edible down there besides Titan, he wanted to be the first to know. No one said anything more. The important words were spent, leaving only
I will follow
action.
this path with you.
They tied their last safety lines together, not to pull back to Highbridge, but to keep from losing one another during the fall. A string of human beads on the only rope they still trusted. Ash took Lyra's hand, feeling the uneven heartbeat through her skin, and whispered, "Whatever the fog takes, I'll keep this." Lyra did not make a promise in return. She only nodded, knowing no one could promise to keep memories in a world built to erase them. Above, part of Highbridge's wall collapsed, stone dust billowing like a cloud, and the bells shifted into a chaotic rumble without rhythm. "Now or never," Mira said, and Jace swallowed hard, nodding as his hand tightened on the rope. Ash took one deep breath, looked at Highbridge behind them, at the black fog rift before them, and chose the direction no one had returned from to warn him against. Then he jumped, pulling Lyra, Mira, and Jace with him, 4 bodies leaving the stone like fragments of a decision broken off from the old world. The black fog rushed up to meet them, icy and heavy, and this time it did not just rummage old memories but tried to unfasten each knot binding them together. Lyra felt what was left of her childhood days pulled out like thread. Each face, each room slipping from her grasp and dissolving into the fog. She fought to keep one thing only, the feeling of Ash's hand squeezing hers, warm and firm like an anchor in a cold flood. Ash, in his own whirlwind, let the fog take strange faces and nameless hunts. But he held on to the sight of Lyra on the balcony that day, eyes moving from the depths to him. Mira laughed in the wind, a sound half fear, half exhilaration, as if she had to die, this was at least a death worth retelling, if anyone remembered to tell it. Jace closed his eyes and whispered the names of foods he had never tasted, like a ridiculous prayer sent to the bottom. They fell so long that Highbridge, with its bridges, bell tower, and fires, shrank to a smudge above and then vanished entirely. Like a memory swallowed by the fog, and somewhere far below, the blue lights and tower shadows of the vanished city slowly grew in their sight like an ancient secret opening its door to those who dared to fall all the way. The fall that seemed endless suddenly slowed, as if the black fog beneath them had thickened into syrupy water, dragging the 4 of them through a freezing membrane. They burst out of that fog layer and dropped the last distance, slamming onto a broken stone bridge, sending dust and shards of blue glass flying. Lyra lay on her back, eyes wide, and above her was not Highbridge's sky, but a whirling ring of black fog, where the cliff's rim now looked like a faint glowing scar. Around them, the vanished city opened up. Shattered towers, broken hanging bridges, and blue glass arches stabbed into the ground like the ribs of a fallen god. In the distance, colossal Titan bodies stood motionless, chained to buildings like statues of flesh that once held up an entire vanished sky. Lyra was the first to spring up, patting to check her bolts, knives, and hand crossbow were intact before letting out a dry laugh like falling stones. Jace just sat there, arms around his knees, staring at the blue reflections in puddles on the bridge, as if he were seeing a new sky. Ash forced himself up and hauled Lyra with him, his hands still shaking from the warped fall, but his eyes beginning to adjust to the city's cold blue light. Beneath her clothes, the Titan heart shard beat steadily, not too fast, not too slow, like the needle of a compass settling. "Is it pointing?" Ash asked softly, asking both Lyra and whatever was lurking in the blue-gray air over the city. Lyra closed her eyes for a moment, then pointed deeper into the city where leaning towers clustered around a round pit like a celestial eye. They left the broken bridge and descended mossy steps into a stone square where statues of cloaked city dwellers stood still, buried in dust as thick as ash. When Jace touched a statue's cheek, the dust fell away to reveal cracked, dried flesh and eyes filmed over like broken glass. "Not statues," Lyra muttered, lips pressed thin. They just stood still until they forgot how to fall. Every face they passed wore a half-finished expression, a frown that never completed, a smile stuck between breaths. As if emotion had been cut off by the fog, Lyra suddenly stopped before an elderly woman, eyes closed, whose jawline and small scar on her lip were exactly like the woman from the Bone Engine dream. "She is my ancestor," Lyra whispered, not because she remembered, but because the Titan heart in her chest thumped in agreement. Ash set a hand on Lyra's shoulder and gently pulled her on, knowing that if they stayed, she would start asking questions with no answers even at the bottom of the rift. The deeper they went, the more the road sloped downward and the thinner the fog above became, revealing enormous rune circles carved into the ground like exposed veins. Lyra felt each rune ring they crossed recognize the heart shard in her chest, some quietly, others screeching at bone-deep frequencies only her skeleton could hear. Lyra, to blunt the creeping dread, quietly recounted a hunter legend. That at the rift's bottom lay a giant hand clutching every memory that had ever fallen. "If that's true, hope it's got a hand free to catch us," Jace cut in with a shaky laugh, making the weight on their shoulders a little lighter. At last they reached the rim of a vast circular plaza, in whose center yawned the black pit Lyra had seen in her vision. The original wound, the mouth of the gate-locking engine. Around the pit, curved Titan bones interlaced into a gigantic arch, hanging in the air like the city's own private sky ribcage.
Stop it.
From the pit's mouth, faint blue light rose with thin mist carrying whispers in a language Lyra didn't know. Yet the heart in her chest answered with faster beats.
I had to do it.
"The engine is down there,"
Way to protect
Lyra
them.
said, each
Why
word
can't you
riding a
see
heartbeat,
that?
"and
Why
it
can't
knows
anyone
we've come."
understand?
A spiral staircase of metal and bone led down into the pit, its railings lined with faded
needs
runes that looked like giant stitches binding two halves of the
everything will
world
be all
together.
right.
They began to descend, each step seemingly coated with someone's memories. At one landing, Lyra suddenly remembered sob laughing on a boat, even though she had never been on a boat. Lyra blinked and swore that for a second she saw herself on High Bridge's walls with different hair, a different face, as if another life were sliding through her. "Don't stare too long," Ash rasped. "Pick which memories are yours and hold to them." For him, the memory he chose was simple. Lyra on the balcony, wind in her hair, eyes on the rift, then turning back to him and nodding. At last they reached the bottom of the stairs, a circular platform around the massive machine Lyra had dreamed of, now looming before them, pulsing like an exposed heart. Titan heart fragments orbited an empty core, and as Lyra stepped closer, the faintly glowing central socket matched the circle of her chest scar. "This place was designed to wait for you," Mira said softly, her voice missing its usual mockery for the first time. From within the machine, a figure of mist and blue light emerged, with blurred features but unmistakable eyes. Lyra's eyes, only older and more tired. "I've been waiting for you to come back," the Shade said, its voice a blend of many, young, old, male, female, all sharing the same heartbeat. Lyra understood she wasn't speaking to a person but to the accumulated memories of the living keys before her, those who had thrown their hearts into the machine to keep the wound open. "They want me to close it," Lyra said, voice shaking. "But you left it open." The Shade smiled, a toothless, weary curve. "We tore our world from the Titan's jaws, but we didn't know if the next would be better, so we left a way back." Ash cut in. "That way back is killing Highbridge piece by piece. Titans climb through it and eat our memories." "Then what do you want?" the Shade asked, eyes sharpening to an unnerving clarity. "Seal the wound fully, sever all paths, or leave it as is and let it rot wider." Lyra felt a stab of pain in her chest. If she set her heart into the core, the wound would cleave, but the shock could drag both Highbridge and this city into somewhere else, or shatter them into countless fragments. "Not shut, not untouched," Ash said slowly, as if listening to himself first. "We redirect it." Mira let out a short laugh. "Redirect a wound the size of a sky, like restringing a crossbow, right?" The Shade lifted a hand to the air and images spilled out. A Highbridge that never existed, a city that never fell, a sky torn into countless layers like Titan scales. "The wound can lead upward, downward, sideways," the Shade said. "But each bend breaks something, memory, flesh, or both." Lyra looked at Ash. "If I link my heart to the machine, but don't set it in fully, I might turn the lock. But the price will be my memories, or someone else's who's standing too close." "Take mine," Ash answered without thinking, the reply leaping out faster than the roar rumbling up from below. "If you forget me, then what?" Lyra asked, simple words heavy as Titan stone. "You'll be left with a machine and a rerouted wound, not knowing who you chose it for." Ash gave a tired hunter's smile. "If I forget, my heart will remember. Somehow. And if it doesn't, you can remind me." Mira looked at Jace and whispered, "If they both lose their minds?" Jace replied, "Then at least we'll get to try Titan cooked a different way down here." The Shade nodded and pointed to a bank of levers and gears on the engine's side, where ancient runes had half faded away.
The mechanism requires.
"Turn it upward. Titans flood the sky, shredding everything above," the Shade said. "Turn it downward. This city sinks into the Titans' mouths below. But if you turn it sideways," the Shade's lips curved, "you might push the fog, the Titans, and the wound's mouth into another border. Somewhere without Highbridge, without you, only others who once tore the sky. Pushing the burden onto another world," Mira muttered. "Very on brand for your ancestors." In her mind's eye, Lyra saw Highbridge. Broken bridges, Ash's sister huddled in their home. The High Priest kneeling before an empty slab, realizing the key had left. She wondered how many times she had fallen, reached this place, stood before this engine, and chosen a different direction. On the back wall, she saw old scratches, tally marks, and faint letters, A.L. "Maybe we've done this before," Ash said quietly, and survived long enough to regret it, or forgotten enough not to. "This time," Lyra said, turning back to the machine, "we won't dump this on anyone else. We'll tilt it just enough so the fog stops pouring into Highbridge, but we won't clamp the wound shut either." The Shade smiled with the weary amusement of someone who tried all the worst options.
You cannot break
A
me.
wound that neither bleeds out nor in, but leaks drop by drop into an empty place. Interesting. Ash stood behind Lyra, wrapping an arm around her waist and placing his hand over hers on the rune-linked metal grip, letting the Titan heart shard connect through them both. Mira and Jace took positions at the levers and gears, ready to haul on Ash's signal, while the shade dissolved back into the machine, leaving them alone with the wound. As Lyra gripped the handle, pain exploded not just in her chest, but in her head and bones, as if her whole body were being stretched to fit over another world's frame. Ash felt his memories being pulled up like water sucked through a crack. His sister's laugh, the smell of roasted Titan, the first time he held Lyra on the platform, all spinning, waiting to be chosen for erasure. He pushed all his thoughts into one image. Lyra falling with him, their hands locked, the city's blue glow growing below. A memory as a promise that this wasn't meaningless. Lyra twisted the handle, feeling as if she were rotating a massive joint in the sky. Far above, the distant ring of black fog began to shift, no longer directly over Highbridge. "Now!" Ash shouted. His voice dragged through two throats, one here and one elsewhere, and Mira and Jace hauled their levers toward the sideways runes. The engine roared, not like Titan or stone, but like the wound itself being bent, pulling streams of black fog into a sideways whirl. Above, the black fog rift's maw slid aside, the fog pillars that once rose straight under Highbridge drifting toward bare rock and nameless emptiness. Ash felt a chunk of memory ripped away. He no longer recalled the High Priest's face clearly, only cold eyes and a knife in his hand. Like a dim streak of light. Lyra, by contrast, felt a name return to her, not of someone lost, but the city's true name rising from the fog's depths like a bubble. Asera. The engine slowed, blue light softening. But the wound did not shut. It contracted, then stretched into a horizontal slash across the faraway sky like frozen lightning. On the other side of that lightning scar, Ash glimpsed faint shapes. Not Highbridge, not this city, but other towers and bridges in some place that had yet to earn a name. Fog, Titans, and the wound's mouth will drain there, the shade said one last time, voice fading. And you remain in the in-between where old and new scars don't overlap. The stone beneath their feet still shook, but no longer with Titan strides. It shook with Asera's slow, deep heartbeat. The city that once tore the sky now stuck halfway between worlds. Lyra swayed and Ash caught her. In her vision, Highbridge appeared hazy, no longer flooded by fog, but its bridges still broken, its hanging houses still precarious, its survivors left to decide what came next. "Do you remember me?" Lyra asked. Half joking, half serious, her voice weak but still trying to stay sharp. Ash looked at her for a long time, then smiled. "There's this stubborn girl who dragged me off a cliff. I'm guessing that's you." Mira plopped down with her back against a bone column and said that if they were stuck between worlds, they should at least see if Asera had any forgotten food stores left. Jace laughed, less shakily this time. "If the fog didn't eat it, we will. For balance." Lyra gazed up at the frozen lightning scar in the sky and thought of the other worlds beyond it, where people might curse Asera for receiving Titans and fog, but at least their Highbridge was temporarily free. "This isn't an ending," she said, almost to herself. "It's just another way to live on the edge of something." Ash took her hand again, their fingers interlacing, and together they looked down at the vanished city, now their temporary home, where the gate-locking engine still throbbed quietly, holding the wound askew, at least until the next fall.